Cheers, guys. Epix 911, welcome to the Monday, February 6th, 2017 edition of VR News. Let's start with the merging of two of my favorite topics, virtual reality and geeky arcade machines. So this was a story on Road to VR about the company Koei-Tecmo. They are the company behind the game Dynasty Warriors, Dead or Alive. They've just announced a virtual reality arcade cabinet. So this one is obviously destined for the fledgling VR arcades in China and Japan. And it's basically a 3-in-1 machine. So it's got a version of Dynasty Warriors VR. They're calling it VR Sense, the machine. And they've used Sense in the other two titles. The first is the oddly named GI Jockey Sense, which is a horse riding game. And then a Resident Evil style game called Horror Sense. Now, they also mentioned there's no details on price or when specifically or how they're doing this, but apparently they've got haptic feedback that's going to mimic the sensation of rats and creepy crawlies going over your head, probably for that Resident Evil game. So it sounds cool. If any of you are either in Japan, China, near one of these VR arcades, or going soon, if you happen to see this game, do me a favor, take some pictures. I would love to get some feedback on this machine when and if it's finally available. It also represents kind of that divide. And when I usually talk about VR arcades not working out here in North America, it's more that type of arcade with the actual machines. Most of what we're seeing here is find space, lease it, slap a few VR HMDs in there, and charge people for time and use. In China and Japan, it's more the whole thing, the decor, the ambiance of an actual arcade environment with actual machines and hardware. So slightly different. Either way, cool sounding concept, behemoth of a unit, but hopefully pretty fun. So yeah, if you ever see one of these in the wild, please document for me. That's how much of a nerd I am for arcade machines. All right, this next story, Ubisoft, and that they might be working on a virtual reality Assassin's Creed game. Now, before you get too excited, because I got really excited when I saw that, let me stop right there and just say it looks to be a room escape style game. So with that said, I'll continue. So apparently there was a posting on the website Dribble by one of the user interface programmers at Ubisoft Paris, Matt Stenquist. And he basically, in that paperwork, which I'll have below, describes, as he puts it, internal Assassin's Creed escape room game. Now, the second part to mention is that keyword internal. A lot of internal projects never amount to anything, and they don't always even get off the whiteboard, right? In terms of being ideas. Now, Eagle Flight was one that did, but for every one of those, there's probably dozens that never get farther than the whiteboard. So hopefully this works into something. He's developing it for the Vive and the Rift using Unreal Engine 4. And if it does come to fruition, hopefully it's a bit more Assassin's Creed, injected into it. Perfect example, what I would love to see, what I think would make a fantastic VR Assassin's Creed game is short little burst missions. For example, maybe you go back in time, the Battle of Hastings in 1066, and you do something to help the Saxons fight back the Normans, right? Ruin William the Conqueror's day and send him back packing. That kind of thing. If you could do short burst scenarios like that, that would be perfect for virtual reality. Each scenario may be 20, 30 minutes and have a whole variety of them. That would be too freaking cool in my opinion. But either way, it'd be nice to see something Assassin's Creed related. This next news piece from Polygon.com. I thought this one was kind of neat, and amazed I was reading it that it had stayed hush-hush for so long. So apparently in the 4.5 PlayStation 4 update, it's currently in beta, being beta tested, by individuals under non-disclosure agreements, yeah, that didn't apparently work because some of them leaked the details that, yeah, this boost mode that's going to be part of this beta is basically going to allow you to play pre-pro games and benefit from faster frame rates, smoother gameplay. Here's why. So what they've done to date is they've patched games, specific games, and that's done to improve textures because simply going to a faster GPU doesn't make textures better. You need an artist to create, better resolution ones, or they were there, but they had to downscale. Now they don't. In other words, the patches add content that wasn't there. With this boost mode, you're basically saying, look, if you have room, use it. You're not having to change anything. You're just making it faster, depending on how they program the game. So perfect example, I had that Resident Evil game that I just released where I did the pro versus regular, like the differences. Perfect example there. You have a game where you basically say, look, if you are at this frame rate, use foveated rendering. Like just have that built in. If you're at this frame rate, you don't need it. And if you do that with games moving forward, you accomplish the best of both worlds. The people with the PlayStation 4 regular don't feel, shorted like second-hand citizens or second-class citizens, and the other guys get some benefit. So apparently this boost mode will take older games like GTA 5, for example, and all those frame rate dips now non-existent. Because you can program with hard caps on your frame rate, and that just means you're targeting a specific number. If there's too much action in any one scene, it could drop. Well, with boost mode, there would be no drop. So all those old games that had stuttering, and we just talked about Assassin's Creed, that was actually an example that was leaked. Assassin's Creed Unity was, aside from being a horribly buggy game on PlayStation 4, slow as frickin' molasses, like a slideshow. The boost mode, smooth as butter, apparently, that game. So, yeah, benefits us. The tie-in, obviously, to virtual reality is smoother gameplay, less foveated rendering, and just, a more fluid experience overall without having to even patch. So, very cool. This next story, this is an UploadVR article, and I understand what the author was trying to say, but I don't necessarily agree that that's the message. And what he was trying to say in the article was, let's not forget the Lonely Gamepad. It should still have a place in our hearts. Don't get lost with the touch, room scale with the touch and the Vive controllers. And I get that. Absolutely, I get that. But I don't think most of us have that as even a thought. I think most of us recognize it's all about the requirements for that specific game you happen to be playing. For example, you're playing a racing game in VR. Most people will want a wheel. You won't want a gamepad. Some might, but most would probably prefer a wheel. You wouldn't use HOTAS, but in a space game like Elite Dangerous, hell yeah, you'd use HOTAS. So for me, it's never been a question of one, taking over and all of a sudden the gamepad is defunct and will never be used again. Absolutely not. I think most of us have that mindset, including developers, the most important group of people, is that, look, depending on the type of game you're making, there's going to be a control architecture that works best for it. Now, having a control architecture that works best for it and then not using that, that's a whole different argument, a whole different story. But all things being equal, a given game is going to probably have a control scheme that works best for it, period. So personally, that's kind of the angle that it should have taken. But again, I understand what he's saying. I just don't see that as an issue. What about you guys? Do you see that as an issue? I don't know. This next news story is a classic example. It's not clickbaiting necessarily. It's just you make a statement, but then the article has nothing to do with the statement. Here's where I'm getting at with this. VentureBeat had an article about shareholders and Mark Zuckerberg. Their headline reads as follows: Facebook shareholders urge company to replace Mark Zuckerberg with independent board chair. Only when you read it, no, that's not what's happening. When you read it, the headline should probably have been a small group of Facebook shareholders working with a watchdog group urge company to replace Zuckerberg with independent board chair, because that's all that's happening. Because when I first read it, I'm thinking, wow, this is probably huge news, right? Mark's in trouble. No, it's a watchdog group. They're called Some of Us. They happen to have some members with Facebook shares on board their group, thus enabling them the ability to create a proposal in the first place and submit it as a shareholder. Does that mean it's going to be followed or passed through? Hell no. A lot can happen. And I think the last thing that'll happen, as in it's probably never going to happen, would be Mark Zuckerberg being replaced in the way that they propose. But interesting article. I just think it's a little misleading title-wise. All right. This last news story, this has to do with a gentleman by the name of Adam Orth joining First Contact to dive deeper into VR games. Now, first, quickly, Adam Orth, the fella behind Adrift with the number 1 instead of the I, kind of based on Gravity, the movie, spaceship crashing. Speaking of room escape puzzles, where we did with Assassin's Creed, think of it as a space version of a room escape puzzle, except instead of a room, it's your spaceship. That's the idea there. Anyways, I thought his name was familiar. So he's joining First Contact. They're the guys behind ROM Extraction. They're working on DLC for it right now. They've got veterans from Blizzard, Infinity Ward. 25 people they've got, and they just finished raising $5 million. I reported that back in December. At the end of the article, they kind of dropped the hint. Looking at some links, I figured out where his name was from. And it's neat how people can be forgotten and rise again, even through bad press. So Adam was the fella from Microsoft who, when the Xbox One was launching and people were complaining about it being always on, he said basically that, look, devices pretty much now are always on, deal with it. That was kind of the tone. There was some tit-tat back and forth. Long story short, Adam's version is he resigned 4 days later. Microsoft's press release seems more like it was a bit of both, mutual agreement, if you get my drift. He feared for the safety of his family, moved to Los Angeles, and has managed to come full circle. So good for him to kind of escape that. And then I just thought about it, bad for me for bringing it up, but they mentioned it in the article themselves. So it's kind of neat, how somebody, and I mean, if it was something horrible he did, yeah, I could see having a second chance, might be a little dicey. Personally, in this case, I don't think so. But there you have it. And that's Monday's news. Guys, have a kick-ass week. This is only the first day. We got many more to go. Long weekend for me, though, next week. Cheers.